We this morning are going to be in the Gospel of John, chapter 6. I'm not sure what page it is in the red Bibles. Is anyone there? 98. 98 in your red Bibles on the other side. Your red Bibles are divided into two sections, Old and New Testament. And the New Testament, which is further on, is on page 98. But we're going to be in John. We've been in John, this 6th chapter, for a few weeks now. We're going to continue on. And we're going to start there this morning with verse 56. I'm going to ask, as we go into the Word today, that we stand in as a gesture and an act of the importance of God's Word in our lives. And verse 56 starts with Jesus saying these words, "Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. Your forefathers ate manna and died, but he who feeds on this bread will live forever." He said this while teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum. So he's in a Jewish synagogue. On hearing it, many of his disciples said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus said to them, "Does this offend you? What if you see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? The Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. The words I have spoken to you are spirit, and they are life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe and who would betray him. He went on to say, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled him." From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. "You do not want to leave too, do you?" Jesus asked the 12. And Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We believe and know that you are the Holy One of God." This is the gospel of our Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated as we go into the Word today. Or if you'd like to stand for the next 20 minutes, that's fine too. I will be, so I don't want to limit your opportunity. We've been in this chapter for a while, and today I want to talk about the calling. The calling that every single one of you sitting in your respective areas have. You probably don't think about it maybe that much if you're like me, but I want to talk about that today. It's back to school time for most people. Maybe there's a few schools that still hold out till after Labor Day, but a lot of people are back in school. And Spearman's back in school. As one of his projects that he had to do for English is he had to do like a little biography, little essay thing about himself and have some pictures. On that, as he was writing it, he said, "I've gone through a lot in my life." Gone through a lot in my life. How many people could say that? Yeah. The thing about it is, I started thinking about is that wherever we are in our life, we feel that's true. We could look back 20 years ago and think, well, 20 years ago, but when you were there, that's how it felt. Gone through a lot. There's something about that brings to light this experience that life, when we say that, we've gone through a lot, it simply means life is kind of hard. And while at 47 I may take a look at a 6th grader, a 3rd grader, a 12th grader and say, "Oh man, your life is so easy." Not for them. And I can take a look, and my parents and wherever they are in life, they can take a look back or take a look at my life and say, "Oh man, you're so you've got this to look forward to, and your problems aren't all that bad." Well, you know what? Not for me. Wherever we are, there's this feeling that we've gone through a lot. Life is not easy. And here you have Jesus teaching in the synagogue. He's been teaching through all of chapter 6. We've been looking at it the last number of weeks, and he's talking to a bunch of Jews that have grown up. This is important, that have grown up in synagogue or in church. And when you grow up, you get to hear the stories. You get to hear the history and the stories that focus and inspire and form our faith. So you get a mindset of how God should be early on, or how God is early on. And when you go through life, when you hear new things, as in the case of people following Jesus, it can sometimes be hard. You've heard the phrase, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. It's because once we have habits, once we have a mindset, it's hard to change it. So Jesus is teaching, and he's in the synagogues, and on hearing it, many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Now, I want to think for a second about disciples. That word discipleship. Because it's very different than what we can imagine and what we commonly use in church, which is membership. Membership is, well, shoot, you're probably like me. I have a lot of membership. We have a membership to Costco, you know. You go in there, here's my membership card. It's got a little thing. We've got a membership where we did at least at one time to Sam's Club. We're a member there. We get a card. We're a member of a fitness facility, a gym. Might not look at, but we are members. We're a member of different organizations. For a while, as Sons of Norway. Membership. That has nothing to do with following Jesus at all. We can, for purposes of order, look at membership roles of our church, but it's just an organizational thing. There's something much bigger than membership. And it has to do with a calling of God. To be a disciple. That calling of God. In fact, when you're looking at this and reading this today, what we just read, Jesus is talking to his disciples and teaching his disciples. And it's a great word, because if you're going to be called, if you're going to follow something, I mean really follow it, it's going to demand some energy, some sacrifice. And the thing about it is that the calling of God, when Jesus is in the midst of his ministry and looking at the 12 disciples, the calling of God is such that he looks at them in the midst of the ministry and says, I want you to remember something. You didn't choose me. I chose you. Now that calling of what they went through, if Jesus would have said, hey, I want you to drop everything and follow me, and was to lay out exactly what they were going to experience in the next 3.5 years, and told them ahead of time what they would be experiencing and what they would be going through, they probably wouldn't have done it. If you would have taken a look at your life and all those trials that you had to go through and are going through and may have to go through, if you knew ahead of time, you wouldn't choose them. You just wouldn't choose them. And the thing about it is that there's this calling. If you take a look at it, here's Peter and his brother James. There's John and Andrew. I'm sorry, brother Andrew and John and James, and they're fishermen. They got, the family business. They're fishermen. It's been passed on from their fathers and maybe even their grandfathers and so forth. They got a good business going. They got a good income, a stable income, probably a 401k, health plan, the whole thing, And Jesus says, I want you to drop everything and follow me. If you don't take a look at that spiritually, and if you look at it through the eyes of our flesh nature, our human nature, that's stupid. That's just stupid. You don't quit your job to follow some guy that has no following, no education, no position in society. You just don't do that. And that's the thing about spirituality, as it starts to reveal that there's this tension between our human nature and the calling of God. Because the calling of God feels, from the human nature, stupid. You just don't drop everything and follow him. Now maybe some people go to church because they're searching for something. That's different than a calling. A calling is something that God reaches out and takes hold of you by your heart and says, this is who you are. This is your destiny. This is what you were destined for before the foundation of the earth. A calling is so big. In fact, the calling of God is so big that it can't fit into our human mind. We think about things as human beings that are very small compared to the big spiritual. We worry about things as human beings that are very small compared to the big spiritual. And Jesus talks about this all the time. As human beings, we constantly are thinking about security, constantly thinking about the future and how it's going to play out and how we can manipulate it and how we can get what we need in our physical nature. And Jesus says, I know that that's a reality. I'm not trying to deny that, but I want you to understand something. There's something much bigger at work that you can't see. And I'm asking you to follow me in trusting that. Trusting what God is doing through me. In fact, I'm going to give you a command, if you will. Don't worry about tomorrow, what will happen. Don't worry about how you're going to get fed or what you're going to eat. How many people have broken that commandment today? Worried about tomorrow. Don't do that. Because you don't know what tomorrow brings. But that's the limitations of our human mind. We can only see what we can see, and the Spirit sees such a bigger picture. And so Jesus calls a number of people, not just the 12. The 12 are specific, but he calls a number of people to become disciples. I mean, I want you to learn something. Now, here's the thing about learning. You can learn from a book, and that's kind of easy for the most part. Or you can learn by way that I'm going to give you an experience, and that's really hard. Because in our human nature, when it comes right down to it, in our human nature, every guy wants to play in the Super Bowl. Gosh, the glory of it all. But very few want to go to the weight room and work out every day. Every person wants to be the person that catches that catch, but nobody wants to be running sprints every other day in training. It's just too hard. As a musician, everybody wants to be up here playing the guitar, seeing the massive crowds, but very few people want to sit in the practice room hour after hour playing. It's just too hard. It's just our nature. We will always, according to that nature, choose the easy way out. And when Jesus is giving this teaching, it's not that he's giving an instruction as you would get from a college professor or a high school teacher. He is giving them an experience, and it's just too hard at this point to follow him, because what he's asking them to do is take everything that they understood as being Jewish people, everything that they understood about the world, everything that they finally had figured out, or at least were close to figuring out, and saying, forget it. I want you to look at your entire life through the prism of who I am. And that's too big. As human beings, we want to keep our God on Sunday morning and let us run through the rest of the week trying to figure it out on our own. And when we need God, we can pull him off the shelf and open up a devotional, and hopefully he'll give us enough word for the day that we can get through the day. But to orientate our entire life around him in the physical, in the human, is just too hard. It is for me. I'm sure it is for you. And this is what Jesus is asking them to do. I don't blame them for walking away. Truth be known, I've wanted to walk away too. More than once. This last week. It's hard being a Christian. It's pretty easy being a church member, though. Come in when I feel like it. Come in when it suits me. Treat the ministry according to my human fancy. Am I in the mood for the Bible study? Oh, I don't know. But being a Christian, it's just too hard. Nobody can do it. That's the point. The calling isn't about us doing anything. It's about God doing everything in spite of us. In spite of us. In spite of our human nature that says, I just can't do it. Because when you get to that part in your human nature where you say, I just can't do it, I just can't. That's where you start to meet God. I was talking with Jim earlier today, and many times we think, man, we need to learn how to wait on God. It's really hard to wait on God. But many times in life, that's what we're called to do. We're called to wait on God. And there's truth to that. But here's another truth that's just as important. Many times God's waiting on us. Just waiting for you to trust me. And then I can take this away from you. There's not a shortage of excuses why you can't be here on Sunday morning. And they're all very good. And they all make sense. But if you're called, that calling will eat away at you in such a way that you're driven in a spiritual way that goes beyond the limitations of our human nature. So here Jesus is explaining and teaching, and they say, this is hard. We can't do it. They say it. Who can accept it? In other words, it's like saying, who can do this? Aware that his disciples were grumbling about it. And that's the whole thing about our human nature. We begin to grumble and we fight. It's hard being human, especially if we're being called. We can be human if we're not called. But if you're called, it's hard. You ever have to deal with your human nature and fight against your human nature? You can't win. Everybody, if you ever experienced dieting, for example, I'm going to cut out sugars. Great. Until all of a sudden you go home and there's a fresh made peach pie sitting on the counter. You're like, oh, and then, then you're kicking in. You kick in your human nature. Okay, pie, it's me and you. And this time you're going down. You're going down because I am going to hold tight to this. I'm going to lose that 5 pounds. I am going to get into shape. So bring it on, pie, because, okay, all right, one piece. That's all I'm having, just a one piece. And then after that, I am the rest of you. That's how the human nature is. And then you take that one piece, just the one piece. All right, just because it's one piece, and it's the only piece I'm going to have. That's it, just this one piece, and that's it. I should put some ice cream on it because it's the only one. And then you start eating halfway and you say, oh man, you know what? Since I blew the diet, I might as well have another piece anyway. Right? And then you eat another piece of pie and then you go, yeah, I'm such a loser. I'm such a loser. That's the human nature on a small portion. On the bigger things, it's the same thing. But God's bigger than our human nature. God says, that's not who you are. That's what you're experiencing. But that's not who you are. My Spirit dwells within you. My calling has been on you since before you were born. That's what you're experiencing. You're experiencing the limitations of being human, the brokenness. But here's the thing. It's only through our brokenness, only through the brokenness of that nature, that we can truly begin to understand our call. Up until then, God becomes no different than any other product that humanly we desire. We want the best buy. We want to go to the church with the best programs that costs us the least amount of money, that has the best flash, just like we do our shoes, just like we do our pants, just like we do everything else that we purchase. But God is not that way. God enters our life only by way, and I wish it was no other way, but this is it. God enters our life only by way of our brokenness. And brokenness stinks. I hate it. None of us would choose it. We would never choose. But just for a moment, I want to present to you the idea that maybe everything that you've had to go through that has given you and damaged you and broken you has meant to open you up to the greatest calling of your life. Maybe. It's kind of like a seed. It's peach season now. I mean, people like peaches? I love peaches. Peaches. Yeah. And peaches can be, they're perfect or they're not so perfect, or they're not so perfect, but then when they're perfect, oh man. And if you take that peach and it's at the right temperature, because I like it a little chilled, and you bite into that thing, and then it just starts to drip down. Drip, and your eyes go in the back of your head like, are you okay? Oh yeah. Sometimes I'll eat a peach, I'll put on Berry White. peaches. There's something about a peach. In the middle of that thing is a seed. And it's one of the hardest seeds I've ever run into. You get a piece of that seed in the peach and you bite it, it's chipped parts of my teeth before. It's so hard. But in that seed of that peach lies a tree. And that tree has thousands of more peaches, with thousands of more trees, with thousands of more peaches. It goes on forever. Eternity is in that one seed. But the only way that seed is ever going to reach its calling is when that outer shell is broken. You can take that seed and put it on the ground, try to coax it into its purpose. Come on, seed. You can do it. Don't you want to be part of an orchard? You can do it. You're a beautiful seed. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You can come out. Yes, you are. You can't coax a seed. Have you ever tried to coax greatness out of someone? You can do it, because that's not. We get, just like that seed, our greatness comes out of our struggles. And when that seed is put into the ground, it has to break open. And then once it breaks open, then it's got to fight its way to the surface. And once it fights its way to the surface, then it's got to compete for the water source around it. And each day and each moment and each week and each month, it's got to struggle and it's got to struggle and it's got to struggle. But in a way, in the struggle, the purpose of the seed is revealed. And that's just like us. Maybe everything that we've had to go through and are going through is to break us open, to see the power of the calling in our lives. The power of the calling of Jesus Christ and God, so that we can go through our lives and see people for who they truly are, and speak life into them, because the calling of God has revealed itself through our brokenness, and relate to them, because the only way that you can heal another person is to connect up with them in their pain. And we will reach out and say, I want you to know about Jesus. I want you to come to church. That'd be great. But I do want you to know about Jesus. That's how it spreads. The kingdom. That's how the healing. That's how the restoration. That's how the redemption. That's how the forgiveness. That's how the transformation begins to grow. Do you know my Jesus? He went on to say in verse 65, this is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled, or in the Greek called him. No one can come to God. God comes to us, and we respond. And it feels, because we are participating in it, we do participate. It's not like we just sit there and God just like picks us up like we're a little baby and then carries us wherever. No, we participate. We're very much involved. But it still originates in God. The seed still has to break open. The seed still has to struggle. The seed still has to fight for water. But the destiny, the purpose is still found in God. God was the originator of it. It's the same with us. And so as we go through the purpose and we go through our struggles and discover that purpose, in discovering the purpose of the call, we discover a power that we didn't even know we had. Look at that little seed. That seed can't create 10,000 peaches. Yes, it can. Through pressure and time. I've said before, God changes caterpillars into butterflies, sand into pearls, and coal into diamonds, and he does so by way of pressure and time. And he's working on us. Those who are called, those who do not understand their calling, will crumble and be crushed. Not permanently, but they'll be crushed. Remember what Jesus says, many are called, few are chosen, and God chooses that which is the weakest among us to lead the strong. God chooses those among us that are the most broken many times, most of the time, to lead those who have not experienced that brokenness. We were reading in the first service, Psalm 34, and it stuck out at me. I don't need you to go with me, but when we got to the part, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and will save those whose spirits are crushed. How are you going to know God does this unless you yourself have been brokenhearted? You just won't. You'll know about God, and some other person can tell you through their brokenness about God, but you still won't know. I circled it and I highlighted it, and listen to verse 19 of 34. Many are the troubles of the righteous. Many are our troubles. Not a few. Many. But the Lord will deliver us out of them all. That's a promise. Isn't that a promise? So that we can say, we know of a Savior. No. I was taught about it in church. I know about it. But I know it. I know Him. I don't need to bring you someplace so that this person can tell you about Him. I know Him because of what I've gone through and because of what He has done and what He is doing. He is my God, not this church's God, mine. And let me tell you about my God, who's also your God, and you might not even know it. That's salvation. That's a revival of the Spirit of God, burning, consuming in the most sacred, the most holy, the most beautiful of ways. Ways that go way beyond what our human minds. Get a good education, get a good job, get married, have kids, retire, die. That's pretty much the limit of what's been shoveled into our face. God says, I've got so much more. How would you like to see the universe unfold before you? I'd like it. Follow me. Oh wow, what are we going to experience? Can't tell you. You choose to, you turn away. But I will show you the universe and the author of the universe as I lead you through times in which you will completely fall apart. I'll end with this. In the letter to the Philippians, Paul says this in verse 10. I'm sorry, 3:10, yeah. He says this, I want to know God and the power of His resurrection. Anybody want that? I want to know God and the power of His resurrection. How many people want to know that today? Me, I do. Here's the other half of the sentence. The other half of 10. And the fellowship of sharing in His sufferings. How many people want that? That's the dilemma we're in. I want to know God and the power of His resurrection, but not the fellowship of His sufferings. That's the two natures that we deal with. But he closes a sentence, says this, becoming like Him in His death, and so somehow to attain to the resurrection. Paul realizes, I don't want to go through this, but I want to share it. Because here's the thing. When we go through our sufferings, it is impossible to go through it alone. Jesus is the only one that could go through His suffering alone, and He did. But we don't have to, because we have Jesus. We have God, and we have what is called the mystical body of Christ, each other. So that we share each other's burdens and we go to the cross together. It's a mutual calling. Each one of us here has a completely different and unique experience in their lives. Really, I'm amazed at how unique and different we all are. And yet the calling is the same. to know God and to be an ambassador of the living God. That is who we are. We would not choose it on our own. I didn't. We would choose church maybe, but not the calling. But because we haven't chose it, because it was chosen for us, he who is faithful in that calling will finish what he began. We are a work in progress, and I think we're on the precipice of beginning to understand how great our calling is. This week I invite you, as you go through your week, to view yourself, to view your life, to view what you're going through, not as a pilgrim or not as someone going through the trials and tribulations and experiences of life, but as an ambassador for the living God, being trained to accomplish a calling that is so great, that is so powerful, that it supersedes all of your dreams.